I am Emma Laurent, a 32-year-old architect living in Paris, carving my life out with precision and passion. Having grown up in the quiet countryside of Normandy, I spent my early years sketching the farms and stone cottages around my village, dreaming of structures that could blend tradition and modernity. My studies in London honed my eye for detail and nurtured an independence that became my compass in life. I had built a world for myself, filled with creativity, ambition, and quiet contentment, until Henri Duval walked into it. Henri, 35, a Michelin-starred chef with a smile as warm as freshly baked crepes, had the kind of presence that made you forget time. Orphaned and raised in a lion orphanage, he carried his past lightly, letting his hands tell stories in the kitchen while his eyes quietly revealed the scars of solitude. I first met him on a crisp morning along the banks of the Seine. Savoring a perfectly cooked coq au vin, he served with a shy, gentle bow. Something in that fleeting moment, the aroma of garlic and wine mingling with the river breeze, tugged at my heart. Our love unfolded like a delicate watercolor painting. We married in a small, intimate ceremony at Notre Dame, before the flames that would later scar its walls. Red roses, whispered vows, and the clinking of Bordeaux glasses marked the beginning of what I thought would be forever. 3 weeks later, a positive pregnancy test filled me with joy so intense it left me breathless. Weekends were spent wandering Montmartre, selecting lavender-patterned curtains for the nursery, debating between Elise or Louis for our child, and dreaming aloud of the life we would share. Henri's arms around me, his whispered promises, whether boy or girl, our child will be our masterpiece, felt like the world itself had paused in our favor. Yet beneath the cobblestone streets and warm cafes, subtle shadows began to form. Henri's smiles occasionally faltered, eyes clouded for reasons I could not yet name. In my search for companionship and understanding, I found Femmes Libres de Paris, a local women's group gathering at the Pompidou Library. I thought them a harmless circle of mothers and professionals, bonding over coffee and equality debates. But as the misty mornings of Normandy gave way to soft drizzles over Parisian streets, I began to sense a tension, a whisper of unease threading through my otherwise perfect days. Something somewhere was quietly off, and I could not yet untangle what it was. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories, they're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. The days following Louis's birth were supposed to be a quiet embrace of new life, a delicate transition into parenthood. But what began as fleeting unease in Paris soon morphed into a storm that swallowed me whole. I had imagined motherhood as an extension of myself, an opportunity to mold, to protect, to create. But the moment Louis opened his bright, innocent eyes, a chill ran through me. He was a boy, not the girl I had envisioned. The reality clashed violently with the life I had imagined, and something inside me snapped. At first, my reactions were subtle. I recoiled from the baby's tiny hands, avoided holding him for long stretches, and questioned Henri with a trembling intensity over the smallest disagreements. But the seed of my discontent grew quickly, fertilized by resentment and a growing sense of betrayal. My mind twisted around a simple thought. The world has wronged me, and this child is evidence. Soon I began documenting every moment with the baby monitor cameras, recording not only to observe Louis but to create a narrative I could control. A story where Henri was the villain, and I the righteous mother forced into despair. I joined Femmes Libres de Paris with fervor, attending every meeting and becoming the group's most ardent voice. What began as camaraderie and discussion about gender equality soon became a network of reinforcement for my darkest impulses. The women spoke of the patriarchal stranglehold in European courts, of the historical oppression of women, of the subtle ways men seized power over mothers and children alike. Their words, well-intentioned in theory, were interpreted by me as justification for every extreme measure I considered. They became my allies, my confidants, my accomplices in the theater of resistance I was constructing around myself. And so the web began to spread. I hacked Henri's smart cameras, tracking his every move in the apartment and restaurant. I intercepted emails and texts, twisted them into false narratives, and posted anonymous messages accusing him of abuse. I purchased prepaid phones to send threatening texts, each carefully designed to escalate fear and control. I began small acts of sabotage, burning a car tire late at night with chemicals I had sourced from a shady Parisian market, slashing a restaurant curtain, leaving misleading notes for the staff. Every action was calculated, every lie layered upon another, until the fabric of truth itself began to fray. The public dimension of my crusade quickly took shape. I wrote blog posts with sensational headlines: Architect Mother Denied Justice, European Court Fails Single Mothers, Michelin Chef's Tyranny Exposed. My words spread through social media, gaining traction among sympathizers and activists. GoFundMe campaigns appeared under my lawyer's guidance, raising thousands of euros supposedly for my legal battle and welfare as a new mother. I spent part of the funds on designer clothes and luxuries, rationalizing that my appearance bolstered credibility. How could anyone doubt the suffering mother in Chanel? The tension with Henri escalated beyond the private sphere. Each confrontation became more volatile. I would accuse him publicly, brandish doctored evidence, and provoke scenes that drew attention from neighbors and authorities. My behavior increasingly alarmed his family, his parents, his sister Sarah, and even colleagues at his restaurant. But by then, I had spun a narrative so convincing that many questioned Henri's integrity. I orchestrated subtle manipulations to isolate him, placing misleading notes about supposed mental instability, leaving evidence that suggested he was careless, dangerous, or abusive. Yet within this chaos, a dissonant thought sometimes pierced my mind. I was overstepping. The child Louis remained a fragile being, innocent and unaware. But I quickly suppressed any pangs of conscience. In my mind, every extreme action was part of a moral imperative. I was not harming him. I was fighting a system that had betrayed mothers, protecting the future of women everywhere. I told myself that this was not madness but resistance, not cruelty but justice. My moral compass, once steady, now wavered violently under the weight of ideology and obsession. The physical manifestations of my actions were equally dramatic. I rigged minor accidents in the apartment to create suspicion of negligence, manipulated camera footage, and staged confrontations that appeared accidental yet plausible. I set small fires, careful to avoid casualties, in Henri's vehicles and property. Anonymous posters labeling him a threat to women and children appeared across Parisian streets, each carefully placed to garner attention without leaving fingerprints. The city itself became a backdrop for my escalating drama, a theater of paranoia and control, fogged over like the streets of Normandy under morning mist. As the weeks turned into months, I recruited allies for my cause. Sophie, Henri's cousin and a psychology student at Sorbonne, was persuaded to write a fabricated letter describing postpartum psychosis, creating a supposed clinical validation of my narrative. Lily, Henri's sister, was coaxed into testifying on my behalf in private discussions, though her loyalty began to falter as inconsistencies emerged. Every layer of deception became more intricate, each step requiring calculation, precision, and nerve. The stakes were no longer just domestic. They had expanded into social, legal, and technological realms. The intensity of my obsession reached its peak during public demonstrations. Armed with placards and a carefully constructed story of victimhood, I stood among hundreds of women at Place de la Concorde, shouting for the return of my child, painting Henri as a tyrant. France 24 and local news covered the events, broadcasting the narrative of the suffering mother and the cruel father. My blog, Que Brise d'une Mère, went viral with tens of thousands of views and hundreds of supportive comments. I had become, in my own eyes, both martyr and heroine, a crusader against patriarchal oppression. But underneath this facade, the threads of truth were weakening. My reliance on lies, manipulation, and illegal actions introduced vulnerabilities I could not fully control. Henri, once passive in his shock and disbelief, began to seek legal counsel, gather independent evidence, and expose the inconsistencies in my story. Each step I took to tighten the web paradoxically exposed cracks. Cameras, hacked devices, and manipulated posts left traces. False statements planted for social proof risked unraveling in the scrutiny of law and reason. Despite the exhilaration of my perceived moral victory, an undercurrent of tension and dread persisted. The exhilaration of deception mingled with fear of exposure. Every knock on the door, every unexpected visitor, every flashing light in the apartment carried the potential to dismantle the carefully constructed empire of lies. And yet I pressed on, rationalizing each act as necessary, each violation as a shield against injustice. The web had grown far beyond my original intentions. It was now a living entity, sprawling through technology, social circles, media, and legal channels, suffocating everyone it touched. By the end of the 13th week, the network of lies had become almost unrecognizable from the woman I had been before Louis's birth. Emma Laurent, the independent architect, had been eclipsed by the architect of deceit, a strategist weaving narratives and manipulating reality to fit a moral vision that justified cruelty. The city, the group, the child, and even Henri were pawns in a drama that seemed both righteous and monstrous. The misty Normandy mornings mirrored the haze in my own mind, beautiful, cold, and suffocating, obscuring the path back to clarity. And there, in the quiet, between the chaos of orchestrated protests and clandestine hacks, I felt the first flicker of doubt, not about the necessity of my actions but about the cost. For every ally gained, trust was broken. For every post that gained sympathy, innocence was endangered. The network was powerful, yes, but also fragile, and the potential for collapse loomed ever larger. I was entangled in my own creation, a web of lies spreading faster than I could control, and for the first time the thought crept into my mind. Could I untangle it before it destroyed everything I claimed to protect? The morning I stepped into the court in Normandy, the sky hung heavy with gray clouds, rain slicing through the streets like shards of glass. The old stone courthouse loomed ahead, its Gothic arches dripping with moisture, windows fogged from the chill. I had spent the previous weeks orchestrating a symphony of deception, weaving lies, hacking devices, manipulating friends and family, and yet now, as I entered the hallowed halls of justice, a tremor ran through me. This was no longer a game. The web I had spun was about to be scrutinized under the harsh light of truth. Henri had enlisted the best lawyer from Brussels, a woman known for her brilliance in family law, particularly in cases of parental rights and child custody. Measured, intelligent, and unflinching, she had already begun gathering an arsenal of evidence: surveillance footage, digital logs, eyewitness accounts, and professional assessments. Each piece carefully corroborated Henri's narrative, each video a silent witness to the chaos I had wrought. For the first time, I felt the overwhelming weight of inevitability. The structures I had built, my narrative of victimhood, my carefully engineered public persona, were fragile against the meticulous dismantling being prepared in secret. The courtroom was a cathedral of tension. Muffled footsteps echoed on the stone floors, the smell of rain mixing with the faint musk of old wood and paper. Rain streaked down the tall windows, blurring the light and adding a cinematic melancholy to the scene. I wore a borrowed Chanel dress, its elegance a thin veneer over the storm inside me. Henri sat at the front, his jaw set, eyes steely. Louis was absent, safe with the Duval family, shielded from the turmoil I had created. Yet knowing he was there, out of reach, did nothing to calm the churning pit in my stomach. The first day of proceedings was procedural, but the tension was electric. The judge, Marie Leclerc, a stern woman of few words and sharper insight, observed every movement, every expression. She did not flinch at my tears or my proclamations of desperation. My lawyer, steadfast yet distant, tried to negotiate, but Henri's counsel would not yield. Each piece of evidence laid bare my misdeeds: the camera hacks, the incendiary acts, the anonymous threats, the manipulated posts, the falsified psychological letters. What had once been a web of subtlety now appeared in stark clarity. I had created a storm of fear and lies, endangering the very child I claimed to protect. The second week escalated dramatically. Witnesses called to the stand included friends who had supported me in Femmes Libres. To my horror, many had begun to distance themselves once Henri's evidence surfaced. Lily, Henri's sister, who I had relied upon as a shield, now testified candidly about my manipulations, revealing conversations I had carefully staged to appear as though I were the victim of postpartum distress. Sophie, the psychology student I had persuaded to write a fabricated letter, recanted under oath, admitting she had been coerced and misled. Each betrayal was a dagger twisting in my chest. My supposed allies had become instruments in the exposure of my crimes. The videos were played in sequence, Louis crying while I orchestrated minor accidents, the fires I had set to the Duval property, messages sent from anonymous phones, manipulations of restaurant staff, surveillance hacks, all presented without commentary, stark and unflinching. Henri remained calm throughout, his presence a testament to the normalcy and rationality I had once sought to destroy. Each frame, each image, slowly unraveled the narrative I had fought to construct. My chest tightened with each revelation, every meticulously crafted lie now serving as proof of guilt. The courtroom debates reached a fever pitch during cross-examinations. My own words, recorded and analyzed, were used against me. Lawyers dissected my statements, exposing inconsistencies, contradictions, and intent. Questions probed the motives behind every action, every sabotage, every post. Do you acknowledge that your actions endangered your child? Were these behaviors reflective of a desire for justice or a personal vendetta? Each inquiry was a scalpel cutting into my self-justified ideology. My initial belief, that I was acting as a crusader for women, correcting societal imbalance, crumbled under scrutiny. I realized, in a painful clarity, that my moral compass had long been replaced by obsession, entitlement, and distorted righteousness. The rain outside mirrored the chaos inside. Every flash of lightning seemed to punctuate the exposure of my crimes. Journalists, once eager to champion my story, now whispered behind cameras, their questions subtle but piercing. Social media campaigns that had celebrated me as a victim had quietly shifted tone, suspicion and skepticism creeping into headlines. My blog, once viral, had become a record of my miscalculations and dangerous obsessions. The web I had spun so carefully was disintegrating in real time, leaving me exposed, vulnerable, and utterly alone. The climax of the trial arrived when the court summoned Henri's private recordings from my apartment and the restaurant. The footage, time-stamped and unedited, showed every extreme act. Minor accidents staged, fires set, anonymous threats, and moments of cruel manipulation directed at Louis. The judge's expression remained impassive, yet the weight of evidence spoke louder than words. My own testimony, intended to evoke sympathy, fell flat, contradicted at every turn by video and witness accounts. In a twist that left me reeling, even the women I had once considered steadfast allies began to distance themselves publicly. Interviews revealed their disillusionment, exposing how my manipulation had extended even to them. The illusion of solidarity, the network I had so heavily relied upon, collapsed spectacularly, demonstrating that deceit, no matter how carefully constructed, cannot endure scrutiny. My moral framing, my self-justification as a defender of justice, was dismantled layer by layer, in a process as deliberate and clinical as it was devastating. Finally, after days of testimony, cross-examination, and emotional turbulence, the verdict was delivered. The sentence was severe but precise: 3 years in prison, mandated psychiatric treatment, and the permanent loss of custodial rights over Louis. The court recognized the danger I had posed, the systematic nature of my manipulations, and the irreversible emotional and physical risks to my child. Henri, while visibly shaken, expressed relief and gratitude for the child's protection, his composure contrasting sharply with my own sense of utter defeat. Sitting in the courtroom, rain-soaked and weary, I felt the full weight of my actions. Hysteria, anger, and justification gave way to raw clarity. I had crossed lines that could never be uncrossed, and the consequences were just. The child I had so desperately attempted to control, the embodiment of my own hopes and fears, was now safe in the care of those who truly loved him. My allies had abandoned me, my lies had been exposed, and the law had spoken with an impartiality I could neither evade nor challenge. In those final hours, I confronted the depth of my own psyche. I recognized that my obsession with control had led me to betray not only others but the very principles I had once claimed to uphold. I had become a cautionary figure, a living example of how unchecked obsession, rationalized under the guise of justice, can spiral into destructive extremes. My anger at perceived societal wrongs had mutated into personal vendetta, with consequences far beyond the initial spark of dissatisfaction. The aftermath was a mix of humiliation, regret, and the faint glimmer of insight. I would spend months in psychiatric care, confronting the distortions in my own mind, learning to separate ideology from obsession, morality from justification. The public, once enthralled by my narrative, moved on, curious, judgmental, fascinated. Henri and Louis began the painstaking work of rebuilding their lives, slowly replacing fear with trust, chaos with normalcy, laughter returning to their mornings in the Normandy light. And yet, within the rubble of my life, lessons remained. The law had acted as the final arbiter of reality, revealing the consequences of my actions in the most unequivocal terms. Truth, when exposed, has a power unmatched by deception, no matter how sophisticated or justified it may seem. Those I had manipulated or deceived, friends, family, even strangers, would recover, reconnect, and heal, while I was left with reflection, accountability, and the enduring understanding that moral absolutism, untempered by empathy and self-awareness, can destroy even the noblest intentions. As the gavel fell, signaling the end of my trial, the rain softened outside, and a muted sun attempted to pierce the gray clouds. The city of Normandy, stoic and indifferent, continued its rhythm, reminding me that life moves forward, even in the face of devastation. I had been defeated, yes, but the confrontation with truth and consequence had forced a clarity I had long evaded. My world had collapsed, yet in its collapse the architecture of reality, justice, accountability, and the enduring bonds of family remained standing, stronger than any web of lies I could ever spin. The day I stepped out of the prison gates in Rouen, the sky over Brussels was a pale gray, the kind of soft light that seemed to wash away the past without promising warmth. My luggage was small, my life pared down to essentials. Every step toward my new apartment felt heavy, as if I carried not only my few belongings but the enormity of my mistakes. I had left behind Paris, the Seine, Montmartre, and most painfully my child Louis. Henri and his family had rebuilt a safe world for him, one I was no longer part of. The pain was sharp, a relentless reminder that the consequences of deception and obsession cannot be escaped. Brussels was quiet, almost forgiving in comparison to the storm I had survived in Normandy. My apartment overlooked a narrow street lined with pale sandstone buildings, their facades washed in the light of late afternoon. I returned to freelance architecture, a career that allowed me to immerse myself in the tangible and the real, spaces that could be measured, structures that obeyed logic, walls that would not betray me. I poured every ounce of energy into my designs, into the precision of lines and the flow of space, perhaps in a subconscious attempt to regain control of a world that had once spiraled wildly out of my grasp. Meanwhile, life for Henri and Louis flourished like the spring after a long winter. Henri moved into a sunlit apartment in Paris, walls painted soft green, shelves adorned with carefully placed art from Normandy trips, and a kitchen that smelled of fresh herbs and warm bread. Louis, now 2 years old, ran through the Jardin des Tuileries, his laughter ringing through the crisp air as he chased pigeons, climbed over benches, and insisted Henri join him in playful chases. The calm rhythm of their days was punctuated by family dinners at the Duval household, escargot and wine shared with Henri's parents, laughter spilling from the table, the kind of warmth I had once coveted but now could only observe from a distance. The contrasts between our lives were stark. I moved cautiously through Brussels, each day a quiet negotiation with my own guilt and the lingering shadows of past choices. I wrote letters to therapists, journaled my thoughts, sketched spaces that embodied freedom and safety, and slowly learned to recognize the difference between control and care, power and love. In Henri and Louis's restored world, I saw the embodiment of true familial love, the kind that requires patience, understanding, and the willingness to forgive without forgetting. Their smiles, their small everyday rituals, and the serene routines of life were proof that happiness is built, nurtured, and defended, not seized through manipulation. Yet, amid this separation and quiet reflection, lessons crystallized, truths I could not ignore, insights I hoped others might glean from the story I had lived so painfully. First, I learned that truth has a gravity that deception cannot match. Every lie I had told, every manipulated post, every coerced testimony eventually succumbed to reality's weight. Henri's calm, measured responses and adherence to fact highlighted the contrast between fleeting manipulations and enduring honesty. Lies may temporarily obscure reality, but they cannot withstand scrutiny indefinitely. Second, I discovered that obsession can masquerade as righteousness. In my mind, I had justified each action as part of a moral crusade, defending mothers, challenging patriarchal structures, protecting what I believed was right. Yet, when examined without bias, my behaviors were extreme, destructive, and ultimately self-serving. True advocacy requires boundaries, empathy, and awareness, not a substitution of personal vendetta for moral duty. Third, I understood the power and fragility of trust. The allies I once relied upon, the women I believed would support my cause, had abandoned me when the truth surfaced. Trust is not simply a tool. It is a responsibility, and betrayal, whether through deceit or coercion, erodes the foundation of relationships irreparably. Observing Henri rebuild trust with Louis and his family underscored how delicate, yet essential, trust is in sustaining love and social cohesion. Fourth, I recognized that love cannot be coerced or fabricated. My attempts to control Louis, to orchestrate his environment, and to manipulate those around me stemmed from a misdirected desire to exert love through control. True love manifests as protection, empathy, and nurturing, not as domination or fear. Witnessing Henri's patience, kindness, and consistency in raising Louis was a lesson in how genuine care fosters growth, safety, and joy. Finally, I learned the profound lesson that accountability and reflection are essential for growth. Confronting my actions, accepting the consequences, and engaging in therapy were the only paths toward self-understanding. The weight of responsibility, though heavy, was instructive. It forced me to examine not only what I had done but why, and in doing so, it allowed the possibility of genuine transformation. As I settled into my new routines in Brussels, I began to see life through a lens tempered by these lessons. I visited local architectural sites, collaborated with clients on projects that emphasized light, transparency, and openness, and slowly reconstructed a sense of ethical engagement with the world. I remained vigilant against the impulses that had once led me astray, cultivating mindfulness, patience, and self-awareness. Every sketch, every design, and every interaction became a practice in clarity and intentionality. Yet, even in reflection, the memory of Louis lingered. The vivid image of his laughter, the curl of his hair in the sunlight, the mischievous twinkle in his eyes. I would never be part of his daily life, never witness the milestones, the first words, or the first steps in the way a mother naturally would. But I held the hope, fragile yet enduring, that by accepting my limitations and embracing accountability, I could someday engage in the world with honesty and compassion, if not with Louis directly. The season shifted in Paris, Normandy, and Brussels alike. Normandy's misty mornings, once a stage for my manipulations, now symbolized clarity and calm. Parisian streets, once sites of protest and media scrutiny, returned to their rhythmic bustle. Henri and Louis's life was a testament to the resilience of love and the restorative power of integrity. Each time I followed a news piece on their family, I felt a mixture of longing, regret, and quiet relief. They were safe, and the worst of my storm had passed. In sharing this story, there is a broader purpose beyond personal confession. The unraveling of a web of lies, and the chaos it can create, offers lessons that are both cautionary and illuminating. For viewers and listeners, these insights are not just about the extremes of one life, but about the subtle ways deception, obsession, and ego can distort reality. By witnessing my missteps, the audience can understand the importance of honesty, empathy, trust, and responsible action in their own lives. So here are 5 key lessons I hope resonate. 1. Truth endures. Lies may appear powerful temporarily, but reality has an unwavering gravity. What is hidden will eventually surface, and only honesty creates lasting stability. 2. Righteousness without empathy is dangerous. Moral conviction must be tempered with self-awareness and compassion. Otherwise, it becomes a justification for harm. 3. Trust is fragile, and precious relationships, whether personal or professional, require integrity. Betrayal can unravel years of connection in moments. 4. Love cannot be enforced. Genuine care and protection arise from choice, patience, and empathy, not from control, coercion, or fear. 5. Accountability fosters growth. Facing the consequences of one's actions, reflecting deeply, and embracing change are the only paths toward authentic personal development. In the quiet moments as I sketch lines of glass and stone, or wander along canals lined with autumn leaves, I carry these lessons not as abstract principles but as lived experiences, each etched into memory by consequence and reflection. The story of my past is painful, dramatic, and filled with regret, but it also carries the enduring truth that clarity, responsibility, and love, when nurtured, can overcome even the darkest shadows we create ourselves. For those watching this story, consider your own webs of truth and lies. Reflect on the relationships you cherish, the intentions you hold, and the consequences of your actions. Like Henri, choose patience and consistency. Like Louis, embrace life's innocence and joy. And like me, learn that acknowledgement of error is the first step toward transformation. If this story touched you or sparked reflection on the webs of lies in your own life, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Share your experiences and insights in the comments. Your story matters, and every conversation reinforces the power of truth. Remember, the strongest bonds are built on honesty, compassion, and accountability. Each time we choose these values, we honor the lives we touch, protect those we love, and fortify the foundation of a just and empathetic world. The saying gleams in the early morning, light bouncing off the gentle waves. Paris awakens slowly, the streets filled with quiet hope, the city carrying on in its rhythm. Normandy's fields glisten with dew, a reminder that even after storms, life renews itself. Henri and Louis thrive in a home built on love and integrity. I live apart but not without purpose, working toward clarity, understanding, and meaningful connection. This is the dawn after the storm, a reminder that truth, reflection, and love, especially maternal love,